Greetings, Romy, and welcome to WromComms, the podcast sharing the joy of sim racing and motorsports made by the Rum team. Welcome! Thanks for stopping by. I am Serta, and I will be your host today. But as those on YouTube can see, we are not alone. But Cody is with us. How are you, mate?
Howdy, howdy, howdy. I'm excited to talk about Assetto Corsa Evo. It gets a Steam page and pictures. It's not just vaporware. We know it exists.
Well, it may be just a producer of fixed images, but yeah. Ike, long time no see. Glad you could make it. Glad that things are rolling on again in a good way for you.
Yes, it's been a difficult year, but finally have the energy to actually be able to talk again. Very, very excited as well to be here once again in the podcast, having a very, very fun discussion, as we probably will do. Topic I wanted to bring was the Rennsport open beta, as well as their first DLC coming to the Epic Store, only the Epic Store at the moment.
And we are honored and very, very happy to have a fantastic guest, Marcel Offermans of rFactor 2 fame and soon of The Last Garage fame. Marcel, how are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Thanks for having me on this podcast. It's always great to have a chat with people who are into sim racing. Happy to be here, and I'll just go with whatever topics that you guys bring up today and try to say something sensible or less sensible about it. We'll see. Thanks.
As always, our topics
are
all
doing, really.
over the place. Exactly.
Yeah.
All over the place, because as those who listen often to our podcast know, we love to go on tangents. But let's skip the tangents and go for a first thing. Marcel, tell us a bit about yourself, how you came to sim racing, how you came to rFactor 2, what are you doing with The Last Garage?
Oh man, do you have an hour?
Yes,
we do. Funnily enough, that's the point of this.
So, yes.
Excellent. So yeah, going back to my first sim racing experience, that's probably me driving revs on the Commodore 64, which is a very, very long time ago, but probably that's the first time you could say something was a sim and not just a racing game where you had to avoid obstacles and other cars. Since then, I've always been playing these games and trying to find ones that are just that little bit more realistic. Big thing was GPL, obviously, Grand Prix Legends, which was the first time that you could really start playing online against other people. I mean, before that, you had a few games that could do that. You could probably in a LAN hook up with 2 or 3 friends, and we did that every now and then. Hold our computers to one of the rooms of one of the friends and try to do some races that way, but that was very involved, so you don't end up doing that every day. With Grand Prix Legends, that all changed. You could race online, you could actually compete with about 10-15 people without too much trouble and without running up your internet bill too high. That really was a game changer, I think. For me, I've always been interested in, well, on the one hand, mechanical and engineering. That's my official background, but I've been almost for all my career just developing software, from embedded stuff to big enterprise things, doing the consultancy thing that a lot of IT people do. And gradually getting more and more involved also in development of sim racing as titles become more open. A modding community started to appear. I also started to write these little tools and get involved and start bugging all the sim developers about the things that they did wrong. And that big mouth probably got me talking to ISI at some point about rFactor 2. I got the opportunity to take over And that meant that I was not just messing around with Sims in my spare time, but it would actually become a full-time job. And not only that, now I had to also start implementing all the things I was complaining about all the time. Yeah, you learn a lot from that, because if you're on the other side of all those complaints, you start to understand how difficult it is to balance all those things and to figure out what the community really wants, because, well, ask 5 different people and they all want something different. So that was kind of an eye-opener and a very interesting period. Developed rFactor 2, I think, in the 6 years or so that I've ran the studio. We've increased the user base by an order of magnitude. It's probably still growing, maybe not as fast as it was before, but it's definitely still one of the more interesting Sims at the moment, I would say. And yeah, about 2 years ago, I decided, well, if I ever gonna start something of my own, this is gonna be the moment. I mean, Studio was part of motorsport games at that point already, being integrated into a bigger whole. They clearly had lots of plans for that, and already a nice structure in place for it as well. So yeah, I thought that's a good time for me to start something else, and to really have the opportunity to, with starting over, fix some of the things that are very difficult to fix if you're working on something that's already on the market. And you might say, well, you can always go back and change that. But if you look at most other sim developers, they start with a base set of software, and every new title just builds on that, because it's very difficult to throw everything away and start all over again. It's probably not even advisable if you already have a lot of stuff. So you end up just adding stuff and modifying stuff on top of the base you already have. So I wanted to see, what can I do if I start over? That's why I started The Last Garage. I can tell you it's a lot of work. I already knew that, but yeah, I'm now in the middle of that, and you sort of see that light at the end of the tunnel, but there's still a lot to do. So yeah, that's where I am now. I'm very much enjoying the process, talking to lots of people about all kinds of applications of this technology as well. I mean, I met you guys in Maastricht in January, where I showed some of the tech for the first time. I think that went pretty well. Lots of positive feedback there from people. So I'm on the right track. But yeah, now I need to take the next steps and try to figure out how to transform this technology into an interesting game. So yeah, that's where I'm now, and I'll stop talking for a second.
I'm still salty that Serta didn't get my my laps in The Last Garage, where I was Scandi flicking the Mark II Escort around that track that no longer exists, but thanks to modding and Sims, we can still have.
So one thing to the listeners and watchers of the podcast, you said starting something on your own because, and this is information that maybe other people outside don't have, you did not start rFactor 2. You just came into rFactor 2 and at the end took rFactor 2 under your wings, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, rFactor 2 at that point was already on the market for a couple of years, and before that it had a public beta phase, and before that a private beta. So I was involved in those phases already. So I knew the team, I knew what ISI was doing with the title, and quite frankly, I was just helping them at that point in time. One thing I was working on was actually migrating first rFactor 1 and then rFactor 2 to Steam, because I was interested in seeing if selling the game through Steam would change their sales in any way and open up new possibilities. So I helped them with that, and pretty soon we saw that I think 80% of sales started coming through Steam. So
Surprise.
the experiment, yeah, it's not a surprise if you look at how the market is right now. But yeah, you never know until you try it, right? So that's one thing that we did together. And really, one evening we were just talking about Steam integration in rFactor 2 and possibilities like adding DLC to it, using the Steam servers as matchmakers, and lots of stuff like that. And yeah, I just all of a sudden got in a conversation where John, the CEO of ISI, said, would you be interested in doing the maintenance of rFactor 2? And I was like, yeah, that's an interesting question. And I thought maintenance sounds a bit boring, but I thought this is my opportunity. So I just asked him, would you be okay if I took over and started developing rFactor 2 further? I thought he's just going to say no to that, but this was my opportunity to ask. And actually, he didn't say no. He said, well, we can talk about that. And that's how I got to take over the existing product. And yeah, getting on the other side of the fence in the community, and now start to actually implement all those features that I was complaining about that were missing, like VR support and stuff like that. So yeah. So no, I didn't start it from scratch, and actually that code base is way older. I think it's from the last century if you look at the very first titles that ISI did. So there's a lot of legacy in there. There's also a lot of battle-proven code in there. So it's not all bad that it's old code. It's also code that has stood the test of time very well and has been ported to, I don't know, 6 versions of Windows, different consoles, etc. And that also helps a lot in making code more robust. But yeah, it also means you need to keep maintaining that code and keep evolving it to keep it current and keep adapting to modern PC architectures and stuff like that, because those things also change, and those do require changes in how you approach the coding as well. So yeah.
Cody,
you were
go ahead.
you were in rFactor 2 development for how many years was it?
6.
I think it's about 6, yeah.
About 6 years. And of course, you know, in that time, sim racing grew a lot. Of course, it's been on an upward trajectory, and doing the math, you left rFactor 2. It was oh goodness. I'll ask you because rather than pulling it up in my notes, when was it that you ended up leaving rFactor 2 to found The Last Garage?
So it's a little bit over 2 years ago. It was in May of 2022 that I left.
Okay. Yeah.
And The Last Garage didn't get started until a few months later, because I was first still trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do and how to approach it. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember that was part of our conversation when we were at SFE. Was did you leave to do the other thing? As you didn't know what you wanted to do. You'd been part of Studio. You'd been Studio 397 basically for 6 years at that point. That's a big change to have to make in your lifestyle and your attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, on the sort of personal side of things, I mean, I've always been some kind of employee in a company, even though my role was slightly different. So all of a sudden you're going to a situation where, you have to make all the money yourself, and nobody's there to help you figure out how to do that. So that's a little change, and that also gets you some extra attention from the home front, so to speak. So
yeah.
Yeah.
That reminds me, at the time in January, Last Garage was still a solo project, if I remember correctly. Is that still the case? Is that still where you are?
It's officially still where I are. There's a few people who are helping me with certain bits. I mean, obviously, there's a big community. I know a lot of people in that community, and there's quite a lot of interest in somehow trying to help. So if people can, I'm going to take, I wouldn't even say advantage of that, but I'm going to kindly accept that help. So it's officially still just me. But I think if we have this conversation again early next year, that will definitely have changed, because we're now at the point, I think, where things can start to scale up, and there's some serious opportunities also to use this code in other applications, which I was never allowed to do at rFactor 2, because we were just basically confined to the gaming market, because you had rFactor Pro, right?
You were the retail market. You were the retail arm of ISI, essentially. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and even though RF Pro is not owned by ISI, they still had an agreement that they would do the automotive and racing professional market. And I don't have that restriction, and there's lots of interesting projects in that area to do as well. So there's a few leads here and there about doing something there as well. I think that's also very interesting, and it will help me improve the code.
Writing an appointment for making an appointment for the booth of the Last Garage on Sim Formula Europe. Cody, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, I was reading some interviews back in 2022. Thank you for reminding me of the year. Whenever you had started the Last Garage, and there were questions around, I think they had been asked to you what is the significance of the name? And the name was kind of a place you can go to get expert help, was the quote that I think it was paraphrasing, but I think that was a Traction interview from 2022. And it seemed like then there was a bit of a focus on B2B simulation consulting. Of course, you have a background in mechanical engineering that could be very valuable to, other people working on projects wanting to talk with you. The Last Garage was, the last place you would need to go for help. That kind of seems like the name. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more to the name, and then I'm curious if that still rings true with the new racing simulation engine that you're working on. I'm curious if that name still rings as true as it did in 2022.
Yeah, I think it does. I'll let you judge that, but the idea behind the name was, I want to be a company where experts' advice and help can be found for this domain, sim racing, whether it's consumers, professional, etc. So that was one part of it, and the other part is that you also see a trend in game development where all these game companies get bigger and they merge together to get even bigger and bigger, and all of a sudden all our games are made by studios that are like 500 people big. And it's awesome what you can do with 500 people, but it's also valuable to have smaller companies in this market space of people that are very passionate about the specific games they're building, and that might not have all the resources, so they have to be a little bit more inventive in how to reach their goals. So I also wanted to be that. I don't want to become that big company. I want to remain fairly small, agile, and make sure that I surround myself with a team of people who are just as passionate about this stuff as myself.
Scarcity begets creativity.
Yeah, but to just answer also if this this description is still current today, it definitely is. I mean, I cannot always talk about everything I'm doing for other companies because, well, we're working on products and things that are their secrets until they decide when is a good time to announce that to the market. But it's, for example, not a secret that I'm working with Heusingfeld and have been for the last year and a half. They're obviously a hardware company developing all kinds of high-end and I think good quality sim gear. And what they're seeing is that there's more and more software and firmware being involved in creating those products nowadays. Or maybe turning it around, if you add more software to it, you can make the products even better. So there's a lot of focus there at the moment on how to do that and how to grow the sort of software development team within that company. And I'm trying to coach them and help them a little bit to make that happen. And yeah, you'll probably see some of that in the next couple of years as they announce their new products. So that's just one example of something I'm doing right now. And there's a few other things, and I can't really talk about them right now, but it's definitely part of what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome. Bit of a jack of all trades, being able to handle both the mechanical side and the electronic side. That's a very rare talent, obviously. So very much TLG, like The Last Garage, definitely being the right right naming scheme for sure. In the nicest way possible.
Do I understand that you're more concentrated in building a sim racing engine only for now, or is the goal of The Last Garage to be something similar, and I choose my words precisely, something similar to Assetto Corsa? Assetto Corsa has ended up, Assetto Corsa 1 has ended up being an engine where people put mods, where people put even new physics, where it's so modular that at the end of the day you don't need the graphic user interface that came with Assetto Corsa. You can use something else. You don't even need part of the physics or the AI, but you can use the base engine to do a ton of stuff. Is that so kinda of what you're doing with The Last Garage?
Well, the honest answer is I don't know yet exactly. I would love to make a racing game, focus on the serious simulation, not as much the gaming aspects of it. So then the question comes, what kind of racing game do you want to make, right? Do you want to make a title like Assetto Corsa, like rFactor 2, which is like basically a platform that allows anyone to add tracks and cars into it? And if you do that, how in the hell are you ever going to create a platform that has even more features than these ones already have? Because Assetto Corsa is probably the best example here, right? I mean, it hasn't been developed anymore by Kunos for many years now, but still the community's adding new stuff to it, and surprising everybody every now and then on what they can still tweak without having access to the code.
Yeah, people are driving through Tokyo and whatever.
It's amazing. So yeah, I don't think I can even make a game that would be as successful as Assetto Corsa, and I think not even Kunos can make another game that is as successful as that one. So my take on that is I'll let them try, see how that goes, and adjust my plans accordingly. So no, I probably won't make something that is like that. But if I have to answer the question as good as I can right now, I definitely want to make a platform where in some form the community can add content, but I want to make sure that that happens in a more legal way than it does right now. Because the problem with a lot of the content right now is it's not licensed, so you can't use it for anything official. And a lot of times that content gets ripped out of either another game or from another modder. They're stealing from each other every now and then. Yeah. And I think as a community also, we need to take a next step there and make sure that either all those mods become open source and there's no illegal ripping because it's all allowed, or if people don't want everybody to use what they did, we need to find a way to make that happen where people cannot easily copy all of that stuff. With the goal of, creating a community that goes to the next level where people maybe can even make a little money from doing good mods, because it takes an insane amount of time. And I think a lot of people appreciate that work a lot, but it's not always easy to give people cups of coffee or $5 or whatever through Patreon and all those things. So there might be better ways of doing that.
While we're on
that
the
sounds
subject,
very much. I was going to say that sounds very much like what we heard from Rennsport prior to their public announcement and things like that. What was your take on, because they were talking about this, they were talking about NFTs and things like that, and obviously NFTs sounds silly, but essentially it's an authentication token to make sure of the legitimacy of the car that you are driving.
Yeah, I think they were thinking more about using blockchain technology than doing NFTs, but yeah.
Yeah. The point is they have some kind of legislationary back end that they're running to make sure the cars that you're driving you've got legitimately. Have you looked into that? Have you spoken to Rennsport at all? And what's your take on how they're doing it?
Well, I haven't spoken to them, or haven't even tried their closed beta, but that, I think that will come once it becomes an open beta later this year. So I'll definitely have a look and see how things work.
I was going to say, you don't have to wait long. It's July the 10th that is open.
I forgot the exact date, so I'm just playing it safe.
Yeah.
But I think those types of technology for authenticating stuff and making sure, it's basically like almost like a copy protection or something like that, where you can make sure that people are not making illegal use of what you made if you don't like that. I mean, those technologies can certainly be used for that. I'm not against it. I mean, NFTs have gotten a really bad name over the last couple of years because people are using them for stuff that, a lot of other people find a bit silly, right? Yeah. Like selling screenshots for millions. I mean, not my thing, but no. But yeah, I mean, we have paintings too that sell for millions, so maybe it's not that crazy, but the technology can be used for these kinds of things. So I'm definitely following that technology, but I haven't made any decisions yet on whether to use it or not. But I'll definitely take a look at how Rennsport does that and how it gets received by the community, because, we can always learn from what others do, right? So.
100%. It sounds as though you're very much observing sim racing as a whole at the moment, and trying to, as you said, you're going to let Kunos see if they can reproduce AC with ACE, and go from there, basically, which makes absolute sense when you're in the position that you're in, where you're able to start from scratch. And how, now that you've done both sides of that process, how different is it building on something that someone else made versus starting from scratch? Which workflow do you prefer?
Well, it's actually not that different, in the sense that even if you start from scratch, you're never gonna build everything yourself.
No,
that would be stupid, right? So just as one of the examples of things I'm using the Godot game engine for my graphics and sound. I mean, I'm not writing a 3D render. I'm not implementing VR support all by myself. That would be silly unless I think I can do a much better job than what's already out there. But I actually think I don't.
No.
So.
No, because again, this was part of the conversation we had off camera at SFE, was where your expertise and where you think you can bring something new to the table is in physics and the realism, and again, we experienced that at SFE, and the video is there, and I wax lyrical about how good just that initial demo was. But to build that physics engine from scratch, how satisfied are you with the work that you've done so far?
Well, I'm never never completely satisfied. I mean, there's lots of things on my list that I still want to improve. I think the basics are good. I'm happy with those. I mean, the driving feeling, that was very important for me to get that right before I start piling on lots of other features. But now I know I still have a lot of things to do. I mean, I'm working on stuff like aero models, diffusers, things like that. And there's a lot of those. A big topic that I haven't touched yet, but I have to, is all the different types of hybrid engines that cars have and how all these components work together, how the cooling works in those things, because those are all very important aspects of hybrid cars and when you start racing them. So there's still a lot of stuff to do, and that's probably not gonna all make it into whatever first release of a game I'm gonna do. But yeah, so I'm never happy. I'm satisfied with what I've done so far. But I'm always on the lookout for ways to improve, and that's also something that, well, it's not something I've put on my website a lot, but I try to work with experts in the industry, in education, to see if there's parts of the model that I can improve, how that could work, etc., etc. So there's a lot of experimentation going on and a lot of prototypes that, well, in the end, don't make it, and I throw them away again. But that's important for me, also because that kind of gives me a sense of how easy it is for me to make changes to some of the modules that I have. And I need to make sure that that remains something that I can easily do, because that's where a lot of existing software over time becomes harder to maintain. It's not as modular. And that means that over time, it becomes harder and harder to make changes to one thing, because if you change something here, it affects almost everything else in the code base.
Pull one thread of the sweater and the whole sweater comes apart. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good analogy there. Yeah. Yeah. What does this little thread do, right?
Now, you've mentioned Godot and you've mentioned modularity. It seems that this choice to use Godot as your, as your basis for this sim provides a lot of really interesting opportunities for simulating things like you said in modules. I really want to hear, especially since I am not a software engineer. I'm not familiar with all this, but the concept of modules seems like something that's really interesting for sim racing, because it feels like you could attach a module and remove a module like you could a part on a car. So I kind of want to hear your thoughts speaking to that, why you chose that, and what some of the benefits are. Evangelize it to me, because I think it's really cool, and I would like you to speak to the choir.
So you want me to evangelize the Godot game engine or modularity?
The modularity aspect of things.
He's an
seems
Assetto
like
Corsa
a really,
fanboy.
Yeah.
It seems really interesting. The like you said.
Yeah. No, I mean, modularity is something that people in software engineering talk about all the time, and it's not a new concept. I think since the 1970s or something, people are talking about its importance of building modular software and keeping things maintainable. But at the same time, since that period of time, we've also, even though we're all trying to be modular, it doesn't always succeed. And that has many different reasons, and a lot of those reasons come from how to define the boundaries, the interfaces between modules. And that has a nice analogy with a car, right? You could make a car that's really modular as well. So you could take out one engine and put in a different one. But if you have a little Mini Cooper and you put in a V8 engine, even though it is also an engine, it still wouldn't fit. So that is just an example of how hard it can be to actually create modules with interfaces that really make something replaceable over time. As perhaps a little bit of a crazy example, but the fact that it's hard to create interfaces and make them in such a way that you can really replace one component with a completely different one that does the same thing but in a totally different way. I think that's one of the important reasons why modularity in software engineering hasn't been easy. Another thing is versioning modules, and also the interfaces between modules. They evolve over time. You want to make changes, you want to add new features. That also probably means you might have to change your interface. Now you have 2 or 3 versions of that interface. How do you deal with that in your code? Can your code accept all 3? Does it even know that there's different versions? That's also an area where a lot of people start taking shortcuts in their code and say, I'm not going to worry about different versions of the software because that's a really hard problem. I'll just build everything against this version and hope for the best. And then over time, as things evolve and other people start making modules, and they also create modules that use a certain version of the interface, things start getting really, really complicated and things don't work anymore. And that's the areas where modularity starts breaking down over time. And it's actually an area where I've been involved with in software engineering for a long time outside of sim racing, in the Apache open source community, where I've been working on a project called Apache Felix, which is a software container for modules that talk through versioned interfaces, etc., etc. So that is like a framework for how to do that. Even though literally that framework wouldn't work very well for sim racing, there's a lot of concepts that I've learned about over the years that help me build something that's hopefully going to stand the test of time there. So modularity is super hard.
I'm biting my tongue all the time because, contrary to Cody, I do come from IT and software development, and therefore I could now go so deep into the rabbit hole and geek with you that even Ike would flunk out at some point. So I'm not saying anything, but what you're saying is ringing a big bell, because it's a discussion that I've had time and time again with colleagues. Yeah.
And this is why I'm the man of the people, because our audience doesn't know any of that. Or some of them do, but a lot of our audience does not know any of that.
They don't need to.
We're a very weird... We're a very weird little group of people. We've got a project manager, a graphic designer, and an electronic engineer. So we all come at this from completely different. And to be fair, you fill in an entirely different sector with your experience, with your mechanical engineering, and the example that you gave of fitting a V8 into a Mini Cooper. I mean, we've seen it done, haven't we? But we've also seen how much work it takes to make that happen, and how sometimes the engine ends up in the wrong end of the car, or it's hanging out the front, or whatever else. So no, brilliant once again.
Tell it to the ABAP people.
Yeah. As we were discussing at SFE, it's wonderful to be able to have these conversations and have them have appeal as well, and it's lovely to be having. Again, it's been lovely to be having these conversations. We should probably move on to some of the news of the month. There wasn't a lot, but there was still some rather big announcements and things that have come on. Quiet is probably the wrong word. We had 2 massive changes in the ecosystem, which again I'm sure Marcel is keeping his eyes on as well. The announcements of Assetto Corsa Evo, which we'll let Cody handle the majority of that. Assetto Corsa is as I said before, I'm an rFactor 2 person. I think that the way rFactor 2 was done was probably the best way that it could be done, and obviously Rennsport getting its open beta, which is going to open the floodgates for even more criticism for them.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about my upbringing, because Ike is correct. I do very much enjoy Assetto Corsa, and a lot of that comes down to the user-generated content that keeps me coming back to it. But I moved to Assetto Corsa from GTR2, which was an ISI-engined game, and I was big in the skin creation, and I was a big fan of GTR2 and the modular system that elements where there it's all a file system. You could drag and drop, that sort of thing. A lot of that is replicated one-to-one in Assetto Corsa, and I think that's what made those two games so popular for user-generated content. Now, that moves us on to Assetto Corsa Evo. I just wanted to get that out of the way, because I'm not anti rFactor 2. Assetto Corsa is the only thing.
No.
I'm familiar with the ISI engine. I got GTR. I got GT Legends when I was 5. I mean, come on. So, anyways, Assetto Corsa Evo. We've known about it. We were told that it's coming out this year, even.
They even
I
said
opened the Steam page
in
and it
July
starts autoplaying in my headphones.
a while ago, but they have not repeated that.
Yes, yeah. Now it just says 2024, and it says 2024 on the Steam page. Yes, Assetto Corsa Evo finally gets a Steam page.
You can wishlist it.
Which means that you can indeed wishlist it. But it gives us a few other little tidbits. We see some cars. We see some still screenshots with some details. And oh my goodness, is it detailed? Is it ever detailed? It shows us taillights. It shows us headlights. It shows us interiors. It shows us engine bays, fully modeled engine bays in very high fidelity. It shows you the dust on the headlight lenses of a 964 Porsche. It looks blisteringly beautiful and blisteringly hard to run. Interestingly enough, though, the minimum specs only requires a GTX 1070. You're not going to make it look like in the screenshots with the GTX 1070, but minimum specs GTX 1070 and processor Intel i7 8700K, which my 9700K is barely holding on. Yay. But they have said that... oh, goodness. Where was I going with that? We have some cars that are on there. We have Alfa Romeos, Alpine, Hyundai, Lamborghini, Porsche, Mercedes, and that's it so far. That's a pretty good start of licenses. Usually where you have... Yes, yeah, Nordschleife right off the bat. That's a big thing that a bunch of people beg for with Sims. There are some people who are like, no Nords, no buy. So right off the bat, they whip it out and say, here, put it on the table. Here's the Nordschleife. Along with that, we have Brands Hatch and we have Imola. So 3 tracks so far, sure to expand. But yeah, so the content's looking good. The car licenses are few but sure to grow. But I like what they have so far. Interesting. Hyundai is on there with the InVision 74. I think that'll be the first appearance of that concept car that they've said is going into production in an actual game. So content-wise, looking like a good start so far. But it makes me wonder, with how blisteringly beautiful these graphics are and high fidelity these graphics are, I wonder if that 1070 is gonna cook. Everything's a step ahead. software evolves, Marcel. I'm sure you know very well. But this looks, at least from the screenshots, we haven't seen any like videos of gameplay or anything like that yet. But it looks so beautiful. I think a lot of people are going to be upgrading their hardware, probably including me, to be able to run this.
Also, because
the thing is,
they say they're going to support VR and triple screens from the get-go. So if you are going to do VR and want that level of quality, you have to buy a 9090 that doesn't exist. Like,
Yes.
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's the thing that it depends how they're built, because obviously we've got a lot of optimization strategies that developers can use both in LOD and things like DLSS and the equivalent AMD, whose name I can't remember, the super sampling resolutions that we've got now. There's so much that can be done with that the 1070 might actually be a legitimately workable graphics card. You won't get the level of detail as has already been said, obviously, but it'll run. And I think that's probably the first signs that we've got that Kunos are actually thinking about their community when it comes to the development of their game. Because we've had there's been a lot of history with ACC, C background, where there has been some utterly deaf moves by Kunos, which I'm allowed to say because I have no stake there. Just as part of their community, they've just had they haven't been listening to what the community wants, and this along with a couple of the BOP changes they put recently into ACC is a very good move forwards as far as them listening to their community. Obviously, there's a lot of noise that will come out from them, but then there is a zeitgeist underneath there of things that do need to be changed, do need to be updated, do need to be, like, I'm pretty sure last time I was in one of the podcasts I said please give us back the engine limiting to be able to BOP cars better. This is the first of the moves that we're seeing where they're actually trying to pay attention, and if they're running with this high fidelity models, it shouldn't be that bad to lower the amount of polygons, get a lower resolution out of the same engine, and then post that to the screen. You're right, it won't look as pretty, but it'll run, which is the main thing. With ACE, I'm pretty sure Kunos are trying to port over the original Assetto Corsa players into a new ecosystem so that they don't have to worry about maintaining Assetto Corsa at all ever again.
And one thing that I consider very interesting, and that's something that Marco Mazzaruto said in an interview in Italian, that's why it doesn't get quoted that much. He specifically, or they, Kunos specifically, went out of Unreal Engine and developed their own graphical engine because they wanted to support VR from day one. And they said our experiences with Assetto Corsa Competizione and the Unreal Engine were so bad that it's one of the important reasons why we have gotten out of the Unreal Engine. So that comes to what you were saying about they, because it's their own code, the graphical engine, they will be able to tweak it so that it fits. Something that I suppose, Marcel, you cannot do as well when you're using a third-party engine like Godot, Unreal, or whatever else is out there, right?
That's actually an interesting point, because the answer is a little bit more nuanced, I think. First of all, I think you don't have to write your own engine to get VR and triple screen support.
Sure.
Just as an example, I've got both already in my engine, and that's something that I haven't shared with the community.
I'm going to write
seen
that
it run on
in
triples.
the news
Exactly,
tomorrow.
yeah.
We have the scoop.
But VR support is also in, and that took me 2 days. So that wasn't difficult. And that's just because the engine already supports it, and supports it well enough to make that run. Now, obviously, you have to make sure that whatever content you put in the game can run at a high enough frame rate. Same is true for triple screens, right? So I think this all starts with a little bit of developer discipline, that right from the start, when you're developing a game, you need to make sure that you test everything you do on the worst case scenario, which is probably either VR or triples. I'm not even sure which is worse, but to be sure, just make sure you test on both. And I've seen a few games in development where optimization comes last. So first, they start building a game. They take an engine, they start building content, and you'll get early builds of a game, and you'll see this game running at 30 frames per second, and you're like, oh my God.
It's so cinematic.
Yeah, it is. And that happens in a lot of games. And typically towards the end of the development cycle, they start worrying about optimization. And in one way, that's okay, right? Because premature optimization, as software developers know, that also doesn't work. It's better to first make sure that you actually know that something is a bottleneck before you start optimizing that part of the code.
And that the code is stable and you won't change it 20 times after.
Exactly, because then you've optimized something you threw away 2 months later, and that also doesn't work. But you have to be sure that you don't do that too late and that you can actually reach your optimization goals. And obviously, I can't see how that went with ACC within Kunos, but they initially didn't have VR, they didn't have triples. It was released without that, right? And then they struggled to optimize it far enough to make that work in the engine. I've talked to Marco a little bit. I know that they, at one point, even got the Epic engineers involved to get triple screen support to work, had a custom branch of Unreal Engine just to make that work well. I mean, it's great that they were able to do that, because in the end it did work. But that also means that you have like your special version of Unreal Engine with changes that you somehow need to maintain over time. And that can slow you down. And I think ultimately that's why Kunos decided to not continue on that path, because there were just too many things in that engine that slowed down, not just the frame rate for end users, but also their development process working with this technology. And that's something obviously that's important for people within the company, because if that's too slow, you're not going to develop new features and stuff fast enough. And I think that was an important reason for them to go back to their own technology, which are obviously a lot more familiar with. So that makes a lot of sense from their point of view to do that. And part of that is also why I didn't choose Unreal Engine, because it's a huge engine. It can do a lot of things. And probably 95% of those things I don't need. It can probably also do VR, but you need to make sure it works right from the start. So I didn't choose that. I chose Godot engine because it's much smaller, and it's actually open source. So I can actually go in and make changes to the engine if I must. And because it's not super big, I have a realistic chance of actually understanding those parts of the engine and making those changes without spending months or without having to hire outside help to get that done. I've actually bumped, and if you can't, you can still try to find someone who can. I've made some little changes, some things where I was like, this doesn't work exactly the way I would like it to work for the things I'm doing. And then you go back to the community, you discuss that. Some of those ideas, they were like, that sounds like a better way to do it. And I can donate that back. Some cases they say, yeah, you're doing that crazy sim racing thing. That doesn't help our other users. You just keep that to yourself. And in both cases, that's absolutely fine, right? I mean, that's a valid point. I'm not making just any game. I'm using it for something very specific. So some of those things, if I want to make a change, I still need to maintain it. But since the whole project is not super large, I can do that without that becoming a problem.
You made a fantastic point as well about the community aspect of it, because a community is not just a group of people with a shared interest. It's people who have different backgrounds, different experiences, different types of knowledge. That's the main thing. Is different types of knowledge. Is being able to have all of that support behind you when you're making your own changes and your own optimizations to a pre-existing graphics engine. I think that's been it's becoming more and more important that community support is acknowledged by developers, because developers can only go so far, and we've seen from the success of Assetto Corsa and a lot of other games. I mean, I've played thousands and thousands of hours of Space Engineers as an alternative one, which is basically a physics sandbox with voxel spaceships that you can throw at each other. That game has been going since 2013 and has literally would be dead if it wasn't for the community support. So it's something that, from our previous discussion as well, I know is very important to you, but it's something that seems to be overlooked by a lot of the larger companies. Again, part of the previous conversation we had. Do you think that's going to be something that we see taken on, or do you think we're going to see these monolithic companies continue to ignore their community strength?
I honestly don't know.
No. As we said at the outset, this is where we speculate.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, one thing you probably can still say about the sim racing community is that it's still very much a niche within the gaming community as a large, right? I mean, you can say titles like Forza and Gran Turismo are mainstream. They probably are. Maybe even the Formula One title is mainstream. But beyond that, most of those games and simulations are just too small to be developed and maintained by big companies. So I think specifically for our space, the community and smaller companies will always be very important, unless we grow so big that we go into the mainstream. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. I mean, even most real racing series don't end up in the mainstream, right? We all watch Formula One, except now, because we're doing this podcast, but, right? But
I was going to say it's something I've actually started straying away from, is because of the mainstream appeal. It's going to sound like an awful hipster for a second, but because of the mainstream appeal of Formula One, or the newly found mainstream appeal, I found myself less and less enticed to watch it or to engage with it. The cars and the sport are now so bloated that it's lost, as you were saying earlier, the agility that made it exciting. It's all so nailed down and clinical is the wrong word, but all the passion seems to have gone from. I mean, we go back to the 1990s and early 2000s, the amount of screaming and passion and things like that you get from a much smaller group of fans. It seems to have gone to the mainstream, and I find myself turned off by that. Whereas the WEC and IMSA and some of those more sports car oriented IndyCar as well, way more entertaining, way more interesting, way more raw, honest. There's a lot of different adjectives you could use there, but there's something missing from the mainstream now.
For me, it's
I don't dislike F1 because it's popular. I dislike it because it's bad.
It's boring. There's no racing anymore. Like it's highly engineered engines with one guy telling them where they have to move to, and because of that, there is no racing. Like in IndyCar, because most of it is spec, there is racing. There is one winner, a different winner in almost every race. Okay, at the end, Palou wins the championship, but you cannot put that on him. He is just consistent. But I up to a point, IndyCar is moving me to think about having racing more spec oriented. Like DTM, I loved DTM with Class 1, and there were a lot of different winners on DTM. There was not a year where you could say, oh, these are dominating, and it was mostly a spec a spec series. The motors were kind of different, but most everything else was exactly the same specifications, even exactly the same pieces, because there was only one company doing those and so on. And IndyCar is similar. IndyCar is very much spec. The motors are different, the drivers are different, and the team makes an enormous difference to get the spec car racing and the way that the driver can have the most out of that, which is not what happens in Formula One. In Formula One, you have the best motor engineer, the best aerodynamics engineer, and at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter who you have moving the car around, almost.
This leads me to a question.
Some might
for
disagree,
Marcel.
but yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Oh, Marcel,
Marcel.
what do you watch? What motorsport do you follow?
Anything where Verstappen wins.
No, I'm not a big Verstappen fanboy, even though he's Dutch or Belgium or whatever he is. No, he's Dutch officially. So I do watch Formula One, but that's also more because I enjoy often watching that with my dad. So it's kind of like almost this family thing where we're watching it together, or if we're not watching it literally together, we're on Skype talking about it while we're watching the race or the practice sessions or stuff like that. I mean, I like the technology part and how they're pushing things and how much crazy development work they can do overnight to a car to completely change its performance, how the simulator comes into that. I mean, that is quite remarkable. But I agree, it doesn't have much to do with motorsport and the art of having a driver go fast and beat the other drivers. I mean, that is totally a different thing, and it doesn't require that much technology. I also like the endurance stuff because of all the strategy involved, and well, in the past at least, because of all the cars breaking down for the most silly reasons and stuff. You never knew what was going to happen there. Cars have unfortunately become very reliable these days, so you don't ever see
Alpine would
them.
disagree.
Well, yeah, okay, there's always a few who get it wrong, but most of them make it to the finish nowadays, and that did remove a little bit of the charm of making it to the end, but I love to watch that. Those are the main series I'm watching. I actually enjoy driving in the sim more than watching. So, and I don't know if that's something that others can relate to, but for me, more I mean, sim racing stuff, I just love to drive myself. I wouldn't enjoy watching my teammate drive all the time. I want to do it myself. So
same issue I have when I'm commentating. You start commentating, you're just like, man, I could be driving this, but instead I have to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask you also another question. What's your golden age? What's the golden era of racing for you with anything? What's your favorite thing?
Oh
if there
God.
was something you could either as a driver and you put yourself in it through racing simulation or just to watch. What's your golden age?
And that's probably influenced by something I've been involved with in the past, which is the old GTP mod for NASCAR Racing 2003. So the old Group C sports cars. Well, I say old, now I can say old. They weren't that old. But that for me was an era that I find very interesting. And I've actually had a lot of conversations with people about bringing that back in a game somehow. I mean, I think some people would enjoy that a lot. There's also a lot of people who say we should make another Grand Prix Legends.
You're in good company.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's a big enough market, but on the other hand, if it's a game that gets enjoyed by a group of people, that's probably already good enough. So that's really a type of game I would love to one day make, and maybe I'll do that. And it has some problems as well, because you can't laser scan the old tracks because they don't exist anymore in that form. So there's some marketing things you have to do differently. Your cars will not be super accurate because there was no CAD data for them in those days most of the time. They just hand built them and modified the designs as they went along. So
every car was different. Yeah,
every car was different, exactly. So that gives you some extra challenges. On the other hand, that shouldn't be a showstopper at all, because you're always making a model of reality, so it's never going to be 100% accurate anyway. But that's I think an era that I enjoyed a lot, and I would like to bring back in a game if I can.
There's words going around with the hypercar class in the WEC that we're entering another golden age, much like the Group C era. Would you agree with that?
I think
if you look at
Go ahead,
if you look at customer manufacturer involvement and stuff like that, you definitely see that. Does it excite me as much as that age?
That's the question.
No, not quite. I think the hybrid, I mean, that's a complaint I have about the Formula One cars as well, with the introduction of hybrid systems and very complicated electronics in the car. I think we've gone overboard a bit, and we should go back to our engineering roots and keep things as simple as we can, and not try to cram every bit of technology that might end up in a road car into the race car because it's good for marketing.
In fact, that's what Formula One is doing for 2026, right? They're reducing the whole hybrid thingy, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
No? Okay.
Ironically, they're taking the MGU-H, which is the turbo spooling motor, out of the Formula One engines as Porsche puts it into a road car.
And wasn't it Porsche who was pushing for that to be in the regs for them to join, and then they ended up not joining?
You believe? Well, what, in 2014?
Something like that.
I don't remember that one. But no, the complication of racing cars now. So you'll be a fan of Valkyrie joining in 2025. Hulking great big V12 and some aerodynamic wizardry, and it screams to 12,000 RPM.
Even as a Corvette fan, yes, I would enjoy that. Yeah.
Ooh, Cody is already drooling. He's gonna propose to you in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah,
I'm a big Corvette guy.
Go and grab some of your models. I do.
I have actually. Ike, since we last talked, I actually have a new Corvette model. The 2023 Le Mans class winner is now sitting on my shelf alongside the 2015, the 2005, and the 2001. I think it was 2001.
I do
so
like the new C8.
I have every generation of Corvette racing Corvette that is won at Le Mans as a 118 model. I too am a Corvette fan.
And an endurance
For a
fan.
moment, I thought you were saying since the last time we talked, I bought another Corvette, but that was before you started
That would
about
be-
scale model stuff.
I'm
we're
saving
not
up for
Very
one.
American.
we're not yet at that point in RomRom. Give us a year or two.
Yeah. But the no, it's very difficult to disagree. So Formula E then, not something that interests you, or do you think that having that bespoke sport that keeps it in a little box for those who are interested is a better way of doing it?
Well, that's a good question because there's some things I like about Formula E and there's some things I don't like about it.
Attack mode.
Nah, not even that bothered
okay.
by something like attack mode. I mean, I like the fact that they're experimenting with ways of making it a little bit more exciting to watch. I just don't enjoy the tracks they're driving on, especially the early years, the street tracks, which were fairly narrow, a lot of start-stop. So I would have enjoyed it more if they were actually able to race on the more classic racetracks. I know that they are doing the street tracks
there,
and
yeah.
running through cities. And that also gave them a lot of opportunities because, well, Formula One can't always race in those cities because of the noise and everything. And taking advantage of that to reach a new audience, that also makes sense. But yeah, I would prefer them to race on the more traditional tracks. And they might end up doing that.
I was going to say, my understanding is they are trying to work towards that as well. For exactly that reason is that
they are trying also to avoid comparison to other series because, of course, the Formula E cars aren't as fast as the others. So for now, they are trying to avoid. And one thing that I have to say in favor of those street tracks, the racing is more near to each other. There is much more racing, and the attack mode brings a level of strategy nowadays, less than it did at the beginning, but a level of strategy that you don't see in other series.
No, absolutely. No, it's one of those things that we've got you here. We may as well make use of the time we have. Where's my microphone audio gone?
We can hear you.
You can hear me fine. Okay, that's the main thing.
No issue.
Okay,
at
cool.
All. No issue.
That's really. Oh, that's fine. That's no problem.
The LEDs broke down, maybe.
No, like I normally have audio feedback in my ears, and it's gone. And I don't know. Anyway, whatever. It's fine. I can hear you guys, and you can hear me. That's all that matters. With that breakdown, and we mentioned Rennsport earlier. Rennsport's going into open beta on the 12th of July.
10th.
We all three have it. Marcel, excited? You said that you were going to keep your eye across it. Are you going to be frequenting Rennsport and see what they've done with the bespoke ISI engine?
Yeah, no, I'm definitely going to check it out because I basically check out all of the sims and at least want to make sure that I understand how they work and what new things they bring to the table, etc. Obviously, physics-wise, I don't expect much to be new there because, like we all know, it's literally the same physics engine there using a little bit older build, I think, than by now is in rFactor 2. So that's about as specific as I can publicly get about that.
No.
But yeah, it's basically the same engine. So it has a lot of potential. I'm curious how they've integrated that into Unreal Engine. How well that works over time with bigger fields of cars, etc., with the triple screens and everything. As soon as that's supported, I'm not even sure if that's in right now, but
not yet.
Don't think
and triple screens is gonna take longer than VR. VR is something that the main developer said they are already working on, and it's gonna be easier as they are using Unreal Engine 5, and that has VR support, but it does not have triple screen support. So they are tweaking around. So screen, as far as my information that is a month ago goes, will not be there as fast as VR, and VR is not there yet.
The other thing as well is that we have things like NVIDIA Surround that mean that you don't need to have baked in triple screen support to get triple screen from a sim. It's not ideal, but it's a patch, it's a workaround, it makes it workable. And I've driven Rennsport on my ultra wide and it runs flawlessly. Which again, 21:9, so it's not full ultra wide, but it's wide enough, and it's a very, very nice aspect ratio. What I am more interested in reality, with this announcement that they've got, is they're releasing their first DLC, which, as we discussed earlier, is the first test of their monetization strategy, and how well will their what are they called? They're called eSIMs or something. They've got a specific thing that they use. That is their blockchain token. I can't remember the name of it now. I remember. Anyway, but it's going to be the first test of how well that works. If there's any way to plagiarize it, if there's anything to do with that. So I'm very interested in that, much like I'm sure you are as well, Marcel. Yeah. As to how well that works. Is it something that's going to be cracked? Is it something that's going to break down over time, or is it going to work in first instance? Technically speaking, with it being blockchain, with it being very much locally authenticated, there should be no servers to go down, like we've seen in a lot of other big releases. But open beta and DLC at the same time, absolutely worst case scenario. If Rennsport can hold up through this, they'll hold up through anything, as far as I know anyway. But I'm not a programming person by any stretch of the imagination. Again, I'm a more analog electronics and things like that. Very, very excited. They've also, in this DLC, they're having the Nürburgring Nordschleife and the Porsche 911 Rennsport, which is very worth salivating over as well. Don't know what the price is going to be as yet. I only got halfway through the video announcing it before we started up for this. Still very excited. I open up to the floor to other impressions, but I'm glad to see again. I'm glad to see that they're adding Nordschleife early. Nordschleife in the ISI physics is wonderful. It always has been through rFactor 2 and rFactor 1 and all the other sims that carry the ISI engine. So I have no doubt that it's going to be just as much fun here. But obviously, Rennsport, again, another very early development game. Interested to see what you guys think of that.
Who wants
And
to start?
Goes very polite. Yeah, I was gonna say everybody goes very polite. I have a feeling. I'm more engaged with Rennsport than the other two are. Someone like the first time that I drove it. Yeah. I want to say the first time I drove Rennsport, I was like, "This is ISI." This was before they made the announcement, and shockingly, it was announced later, a couple of months later.
I was impressed with Rennsport graphically. I like what they're doing, certainly with a lot of the things around the game. There's a lot of things around the game I don't like. Their whole stuff about NFT, what have you, that nonsense. They've toned down a lot of the recent messaging around that since that whole market crashed. I felt that was gimmicky from the get-go. I will say, handling-wise, I drove Rennsport a few times. I drove it at Sim Racing Expo, and I was, again, impressed with the graphics of it, but the force feedback, like even the physics felt pretty good, but the force feedback felt just woefully boring compared to anything else I've driven. The mid-corner feeling is just not there. There's none of that. And then I tested it at home, had the beta key, tested it at home, and I felt the same thing. This was after an update or two, and I haven't touched it since. That's kind of where I'm at. Just I'm excited to see where it goes. Again, that's a thing that they could end up. I don't know. I'm not gonna say it's that easy, but they could release an update and overnight it's fixed, right? And then it's great. This feels amazing. I love this. And I'll probably play it more then. But I was just I'm all right.
So to me, it still feels. I hope that the next update is gonna change that, but it still feels like Automobilista 2 felt until they got the force feedback really connected to the physics. Like Automobilista 2 nowadays has enormously excellent physics. They translate those very well to force feedback. In my opinion, the best physics and force feedback translation out there at the moment. Maybe iRacing since the updates, but I'm not an iRacer. And for me, Rennsport at the moment, barring that maybe the next update is going to change that, feels like the physics are there, but they still are not able to transport them to force feedback, at least for my SimuQ system. You feel, as Ike said, you see that the physics are there. Somehow you notice that they are there. But when you're driving them, as you said, Cody, it's like, meh, like, yeah, I know you are there. Physics, come out to play.
That's just what you get for driving a Porsche.
Oh, no.
You put the engine in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's an interesting stage in their development. Marcel,
Reza
fair.
needed a year to get it right after they went open. So it's not an easy thing. I'll give them that.
I'm very interested to see what Marcel thinks of it after they go live on the 10th of July. Yeah,
no, I'm definitely gonna give it another go because I did try it. I just didn't get a beta key. I went to an event at the Bilsterberg and they were there with a couple of sims, so I probably spent like 15 minutes driving it there. That was still a very early build, so you couldn't change anything setup or driving aids wise. So I struggled to really get a feeling because I didn't just want to drive a lap. I was just messing around with the car to see what the edges of grip would do and stuff like that. And people were watching me and looking at me strangely, like, what are you doing with the car? I'm just testing it.
Yeah, same as what I did with the last garage. Just kind of, it's a car. What happens when I do this?
Exactly. So I was doing that and I did that for 15 minutes and then there was a queue starting and others had a go, so I didn't really get a good impression yet there. So I'll definitely try it now. I mean, a lot has changed, and for me, what's interesting indeed, force feedback is definitely one of the more important things, and it's become very tricky because a lot of wheel manufacturers start adding a ton of settings to force feedback. Games start adding a lot of sliders and stuff to change how the force feedback works. And just taking a step back, I'm always like, why?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a physics engine. It simulates everything up to the steering wheel. So you have this axle, and there's some kind of torque on that axle from whatever happens on the suspension and the steering mechanism. And that's what you should be feeling.
On the other hand, because we don't have the G's in the body, I always said force feedback on the wheel has to give you more than it would do in a real life car, as you have to transport a lot more information to be able to understand what is happening.
But again,
that is also an interesting point. But then you get force feedback plus, right? You add other stuff on top of it. But
this is the reason why BeamNG has always been held as one of the best games for force feedback, is because they're not adding anything. They're just simulating the steering rack and the suspension geometry and everything accurately, so they don't have to add anything on top. You're just getting the raw performance through the wheelbase. Something that I noticed when I was testing, one of the first things I noticed when I was testing the Camus was how much easier it was to do the traditional lock to lock in BeamNG versus, say, for example, Assetto Corsa or ACC or AMS2. And AMS2 was relatively easy, but as you were saying, that because BeamNG is actually simulating that full geometry, you can drive it like a proper car. Whereas in the other sims, you're having to drive it like a simulator instead. It's just to add to your point.
Jens, shall we move to the question of the month?
Do you have a question of the month?
So let's start.
Do you?
So wait.
Now I'm
moment,
curious.
Wait a moment. So
I am now.
Marcel, we always at the end of the podcast, at the end of the podcast, we ask our viewers a question like I don't know. What are your favorite 3 female drivers, or what are your 3 favorite tracks? And last month, Cody put the question out there: which is your favorite racing sim older than 12 years? So as to get Assetto Corsa out of the way. And we got some very interesting answers. Renan Gonsalves said Mario Kart 64. I think it was a joke. Filippo said Richard Burns Rally, which is something that many would agree with. Metropolis on the Dreamcast, which I've never driven. I don't know anything about it. I'll just take their word for it. What else? Race Driver Grit, which I wouldn't consider a racing sim, but a great, fantastic racing game that I love too. What else? Race On, the expansion or sequel to Race 07.
No one's mentioned the original Gran Turismo.
Nope. Not as far as I can see. Nope.
Which I used to drive on my Mad Cats on the original PlayStation. I had a Mad Cat steering wheel with no force feedback, and my absolute nemesis was the TVR Tuscan around SS Route 11, which I'm still bitter that they've taken out of the more recent Gran Turismos, and wish that someone would make an Assetto Corsa.
You know, I see your Mad Cat's controller with no force feedback, and I raise you. I beat Race Driver Grid on a keyboard and mouse.
Marcel, which would be your other than rFactor 2, which would be your favorite racing sim older than 12 years?
12 years was a long time ago, man.
Yeah, I'll probably stick with Grand Prix Legends.
Good answer. That's a good answer. Insert Steve Harvey gif. Good answer. Yes, that's that's a great choice.
And as we have a fantastic guest, which has been a lot of fun having you here, and I know next time that we meet in person, we too are gonna geek so much about software, while the other two do other things because they would get bored.
I'll just be driving more of the last garage. That'll
exactly. Marcel,
it's fine by me. I didn't have enough time.
What would be your question of the month to our viewers, to us and to our viewers? Motorsport or
Feel free to use this as market research as well.
Yes.
No, I actually will, because I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in sim racing about age shifters and how to create better age shifters. So I don't know if this works as a question of the month, but I think getting community feedback on how can we make better age shifters, because right now they're very simple in the sense that from a controller point of view, they're just 6 or 7 or 8 buttons.
Yep.
So you put the lever in a certain gear, it presses a button, you're in first. You move the lever, you press another button, you're in second. That's how 8 shifters work in Sims. And that causes a lot of problems because we cannot properly simulate all the things that we need when properly using an 8 shifter. And yes, I know there's lots of patches and plugins that improve that a little bit, but how would you actually solve that problem if you could design a better shifter and a better piece of software to go with that?
Give them.
I already have a couple of suggestions. No. I have a couple of specific suggestions. One is hydraulic damping, because obviously, The other thing that I was going to say is stop using buttons. Because I'm using the Logitech G27 shifter. And one of the things that I actually really like about that is they use essentially a joystick where it's got 2 potentiometers, which have different values. Now, different shifters have different shift points, and a short shifter is going to be very different to a traditional shifter. A shifter in a truck is going to have a very different throw, and that sort of thing. I think that some level of damping and switching to using a more analog readout would be a fantastic first step. And one of the other big things that is massively missed out by a lot of developers is it's not about the shifter, it's about the clutch. Because a lot of developers completely ignore the clutch and have it on a 0 to 50 with a fixed bite point. Whereas if you go to reality, one of the most critical things that separates cars in a given race, and something that is still, let's go to the pinnacle of motorsport or Formula 1, one of the things that they spend the outlap doing, or the warm-up lap doing, is finding the bite point on the clutch to get the ideal launch. Now, I think that the first person to, or the first developer to nail that variability in a clutch is going to make a significant step towards the realism of a shifter.
Simulcube active pedals.
No.
Might be only one part of the solution, but I think what Cody just showed us is the other part. Force feedback joystick. So a 2-axis force feedback system that is strong enough to simulate the gates in the gear.
Exactly.
Just by only allowing you to move the stick in that area.
Yeah. Yep. I was thinking more of the software side of it, because the hardware is obviously something that you can't. If someone's got a Logitech shifter, you can't account for that. But what you can do is make sure that when they're shifting gear, it feels like you're shifting gear in a Vauxhall Corsa road car versus a Group B or a Group C race car. They're all going to have very different feelings, and obviously, if your clutch point is different, or it bites differently and things like that, that's something that has been entirely missed as far as I know in Sims.
Absolutely, and yes, it's a problem that we can only solve if we combine hardware and software changes. Can't be solved in hardware, can't be solved in just software. It needs a better combination of the two somehow.
Yeah. Gents?
All right. Cody, any famous last words?
Thank you for coming on the podcast with us. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. It was very enjoyable.
Glad to hear that. Ike?
It's always fun to speak with sim racing with people who are just as passionate as yourself, and I think that having Marcel on has given an entirely new perspective. So to echo what Cody says, thank you very much for coming. Remember, always be excellent to each other. The world's a very, very horrible place at times. This is our little corner of peace. let's keep it that way.
That said, argue in the comments.
No.
Get that engagement up.
Exactly.
Yes. Click the dislike button. No.
We're
Always
setting
be
an
excellent to
example
each
here,
other.
right, Cody?
Yeah. That's a typical American thing to say.
Marcel,
good
any
for business.
famous last words?
Well, just good holiday to everybody. I mean, it's the summertime in most of this planet. I know the Australians will disagree, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to what happens in the rest of this year. There's some really exciting new titles and updates coming out, so I'm watching those closely. I might even go back to a little Live for Speed racing now that they have this new modding system in place as well.
Oh.
So that might be something I'll be enjoying and going back to over the summer days. But thanks everybody for being here. It was very enjoyable.
I will agree with Cody and Ike. Thank you very much. It was a lot of fun. We're gonna geek a lot about software next time we see each other, for sure. It was great. And my famous last words, as always: save fuel, pick up, and we'll see each other on the podium. Bye.
Bye.